Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Hope you're doing well. At this moment, I'm currently in quarantine for 7 days because recently I got diagnosed with COVID-19. And as usual, I'm late to everything and always behind on everything. So I've caught COVID-19, I was going to say 2 years late, but actually 3 years late in 2022. So as per the current guidelines in South Korea, I have to quarantine for 7 days. So I'm at home this week in my apartment. I do have a few symptoms. Fingers crossed I'm recovering, but I'm not doing too bad. I'm not severely ill with COVID. So today's topic is something that happened to me recently, so I feel like it's a good time to talk about it. And as you guessed from the title, it is about hospital experiences while you're living in South Korea, but also generally as someone who's a foreigner in a different country. It's really daunting and gave me a lot of anxiety, and I thought it would be useful for me to talk about because I feel like this video is something to make you think about something you really don't want to think about. I never thought that I would end up in a South Korean hospital, let alone a South Korean emergency room, but realistically, I should have thought about it a lot more, probably researched it a lot more, made myself a little bit more prepared for that possibility to happen. Had it in my mind like, oh yeah, it could happen, I could end up in a hospital, but I didn't really prepare, you know? I didn't like list down everything, this is my step-by-step what I should do if I have an emergency. And I will be honest, my training that I received when I arrived here, it did cover the real basics, like this is the number you should call for an emergency, and that's pretty much it. So of course I knew the numbers to call, but then it's what happens after that. As you may know or may not know, I live in rural South Korea. When I say rural, I mean the middle of nowhere. I've done a whole video on my life in rural South Korea and a bit more about my town. The video is in the description box if you're interested. My boyfriend is from Seoul. He came to visit my town and he was just in absolute shock. He couldn't believe that I was living in this place because it didn't have many amenities, it didn't have many facilities. And certainly if I've needed anything serious or important, then I've had to go to the next town, to the town that I'm living in. And although I do talk about this place like I am literally in the middle of nowhere, I have to hike for days to get anything, it is a pretty good connected town. It's not completely isolating, but that's in terms of like leisurely travel. So if I want to go to Seoul, hey, that's fine, I can plan my weekends, jump on the train and go. But in terms of like rural living day-to-day life, that's where it becomes more difficult because I don't have the immediate things around me. Luckily, although I went to the emergency room, my emergency wasn't life-threatening or anything sinister, but I was in a lot of pain, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. I'm very fortunate and lucky to have people who are native Korean, who I can communicate with, who were there to help me navigate a lot of the medical processes that I needed to happen. And I think without them, I would have been just full of anxiety. I would have probably had a mental breakdown, and more than I did. And I probably would have considered just thinking, I can't live here anymore because this is too stressful and it's too draining and hard to navigate as a foreigner. Luckily, I have quite a good support system here, so even though it was scary, I did have help from people, native Korean people here. I've suffered from headaches and migraines for a long time, many years, and the last few months they got increasingly worse, and I don't know what had been triggering them, so I think that is what was the cause for concern mainly for me, because I don't feel like I could pinpoint the reason why the migraines were getting worse. So it's like a couple of, maybe it was this or maybe it was this. I had a really bad migraine while I was on winter vacation. I was actually on a vacation trip with my boyfriend and his family, and the night before we were leaving, I suffered a really bad migraine attack. It was so severe that I almost asked my boyfriend to call the ambulance then, but me being someone who doesn't like to cause issues or make a fuss about something like that, especially because we were with his family on this vacation trip. I just said to him, you know, maybe I just need some medication. And this was about 3 o'clock in the morning. He went to the nearby on-site health center pharmacy place, and he came back with some really strong painkillers. And luckily I took those, and he was just massaging my neck, massaging my head, and eventually, as I was crying and curling up in pain and trying to relax with the massage and waiting for the painkillers to kick in, I eventually fell asleep. And the next day I had the postdrome, which is kind of like the after headache sluggishness, and you kind of feel a little bit hungover and drained and very, very tired. That was like the worst migraine I've ever had. Then a few weeks later, I'd been back at school. I had eaten lunch and my headache had started to develop. So I drank some water and went outside, and I had my phone, and I thought, let's, come on, we can do this. I don't know why I was talking to myself like a pep talk, like we, like a team, but I was just in my head like, we can do this, we can get through the rest of the day. I couldn't look at my computer screen, and then I realized that my headache was inevitably going to turn into a migraine because I felt the aura, I was getting light sensitivity, and so I just sort of sat with my head cradled in my hand and just waited for the time when I could leave. By the time I was leaving work, it got really, really severe that I was crying on my bus home. And I just remember thinking, I can't even see where I'm walking, really. I'm just focusing on the direction of how to get home. And so when I got home, I tried to look for my painkillers and I couldn't remember where I put them. And also with migraines, if you're moving around, they just hate it. Gonna go and lie down on my bed. But before I could lie down, I just felt this vomit coming. So I ended up being sick. I had really bad nausea, I couldn't really see anything. My neck was also really stiff, which was also what happened to me in the winter vacation. And at this point, my migraine was starting to feel as severe, if not a little bit more severe, than the one I'd suffered with in the vacation. So it kind of rang some alarm bells for me. My vision was kind of just like, I could just see stars, and I had very bad light sensitivity. So even like trying to navigate my phone to get help was awful. So I knew the emergency number in South Korea. One, I couldn't really look at my phone, and two, I didn't feel confident and comfortable trying to navigate a call in Korean, my basic Korean, and with the potential that the emergency service operator couldn't speak any English. And so I did the next thing I could think of, which was call my boyfriend. I was told that an ambulance was coming to pick me up. Then I was just like, oh god, now I need to sort of like navigate and move myself. And luckily I just had everything ready on the side, because when I got in, I just dumped everything down. I remember holding onto my fridge and I was just waiting and waiting and waiting for these paramedics to turn up. My boyfriend confirmed everything to the paramedic, and they knocked on the door, they arrived, and I left with the paramedic. In terms of like the staff, the paramedics that turned up, I cannot fault them. So actually getting to the hospital, I remember being in the ambulance, and it was really weird because the only thing I could do was focus on this blood pressure machine that was above me, and on it it said made in the UK, and I was just looking at that like, okay, I'm gonna take that as a good sign. We got to the hospital, had to answer some questions, and honestly, I don't know how I got through these questions, because the whole time I just wanted to vomit everywhere. That's all I could focus on, was like, don't be sick, don't be sick, don't be sick. There was just me and 2 other people in this big room, and they were already being treated. Paramedics said, it's okay, and I said 감사합니다 to them, and they left. At this point was like, please, yeah, just give me some pain relief, please. So I had 2 bags of IV drugs. Then they told me they were gonna do an MRI. A nurse came over and she said to me, can you speak English? And I said, yes. And she said, oh, okay, well, I can speak some English and I can explain what's happening to you. So after my MRI scan, they basically told me there's nothing sinister in there, you know, you have a brain, which was good news. I was so happy, because so to actually like have the MRI and know that peace of mind was a big relief. I would kind of like discharged from the hospital after the drugs had finished. And then before I could leave, I had to pay for the services. So the way it works in Korea is a health insurance. for me specifically, as a public school teacher on E2 visa, in my contract, my school pays part of the health insurance and I pay part of the health insurance from my wage. So I only pay, I think it's split 50-50 without looking at my contract. Usually, most things are covered by your health insurance. And let me tell you, I would not want to be ill in Korea without any sort of insurance. So obviously, if you're coming here as a tourist, you would have travel insurance. Here's an example for you. And in fact, I'll try and get a picture of this bill so you can see it for yourself. I had to go back to the same hospital where I had my ER migraine episode to get the PCR test for the result. I had to pay 8,400 won. If I didn't have health insurance, that PCR test would have cost me, I think it was 112,000 won. That's the discount that I have because of my medical insurance. I just had to take my ARC card to the hospital, and then they take that information and they can find my medical insurance policy based off the information on my ARC. And when I was discharged, they told me I needed to go to neurology the following day. It was really late at that point. I think it was after 10 p.m. Next to the hospital was a Love Motel, and they are usually pretty cheap to stay in, with the purpose of, I'm sure you can come to the conclusion of, I saw this Love Motel and I thought, I am really exhausted. I just want to lie down. John is on his way from Seoul, and I know this town is a stop on the train station that he will be on his way through anyway. I just paid a little bit more and I just stayed in this Love Motel, which actually turned out to be a really nice place actually. And this is just a little bit of background info if you don't know about a Love Motel. The reason people go there is for what you can imagine. And so when you check in, you don't actually have to give any information. You just say, I want to stay here for however many nights and there's this many people, and you just pay the money and they give you the key or the key card and you just go. So it's really a cheap and convenient way if you ever need somewhere to stay on a whim, or if you want to use it for the reason it's designed for, you know, no shame or shade here. Then I not long after John found me, I told him the name of the motel is literally right by the train station, which also is where the hospital was. The next day we checked out the motel. Obviously we had a shower and tried to freshen up as much as possible, and then we went to the neurology appointment, and John basically took over because the consultation and navigating around the hospital and getting the medication from the pharmacy was all Korean. Basically, the neurologist in a nutshell said, I don't know what is causing your migraines because your MRI scan is completely clear. There's nothing sinister, there's nothing a cause for concern. So it's basically up to me to find out my trigger. So since that point of being hospitalized, I have been really trying to figure out and make some changes to see what could have been causing my migraines. It's obviously going to be more likely if you're in a city, you know, places like Seoul or Busan are definitely more likely to have places that are English speaking. There's actually a women's clinic that I go to for women's health that is also advertised as English speaking, and that's in Seoul as well, because there's just nothing, as far as I know, that I can research effectively that's around where I live rurally that can offer me the services that I need. It's for things like that I would have to go to Seoul, because it's more likely that I can communicate better in English and I wouldn't have to rely on my boyfriend being there. I mean, he probably wouldn't care, but it's something that maybe other couples or like you maybe wouldn't want to bring your friend along to, because it's personal. So I would say for anything like that, if you're living rural or you know you're going to move somewhere rural, just bear that in mind, that you're probably going to have to travel somewhere if you want to have English speaking as an option for a particular medical service that you require. So all in all, like, my medical experience wasn't really bad. I think it was more my anxiety and my panic of being somewhere where I couldn't speak the language, so I can't speak good enough Korean to navigate anything medical. But living rural for an emergency doesn't necessarily mean bad. I can only speak from my experience, obviously, as well. But if you are going to be living rural, just don't, it doesn't mean panic. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that you're going to have to be a bit more prepared. You're going to have to try and surround yourself with a good support network if you can, of native speakers. They can support you as well if you need it. If you're living in a city, you have so much more choice and options and accessibility to different language speaking facilities. So you can really have your choice of the crop. Rurally, you're limited with what you can use, where you can go, what facilities are available. So you just have to really prepare yourself for that, and it's definitely been a learning curve, and it's definitely been eye-opening for me. So I'm just trying to take the positive from it, really. The reason I want to make this video is because I think it's important to talk about these types of experiences, and especially for people who, like me, might be coming through EPIK or a different type of recruitment into Korea that may end up placing you rurally. This video is probably more suited to you, and definitely more of like the target audience that I'm going for with this video, because in case it helps anyone else and they can watch it and prepare themselves in readiness for when they move to Korea. Hopefully it doesn't happen and you won't need to use this advice, but at least if you know a little bit more about, you can kind of build what to anticipate if you go to a hospital or a medical facility in a place that is not one of the major cities, or at least a bigger built up area. So I'm going to leave that there for today. I'm sorry this topic was a little bit of a downer. If you have any questions or you want to leave any comments, please do below, and make sure to like and subscribe, because that really helps out the channel, really helps me out. And with that, I think that's the end. So I'll see you on the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye.